Hello and welcome to CDO Magazine interview series. My name is Paul Hardy. I am the EVP of Professional Service at Ironside. We're a data and analytics consultancy based outside of Boston, as you can see in my background here. And I'm here today with Russ Scoville. He is the VP of Enterprise Data Services at CareSource. Russ, welcome. Glad to be talking with you this afternoon. I thought maybe we could start by having you tell us a little bit about your role at CareSource.
Sure. Leading the data engineering team, my job and role here at the company is to oversee data ingestion, engineering, modeling, architecture, warehousing, reporting, and enforcing data governance. Really, all applications of taking data from our trading parties and making it available to our business partners.
That's great. Thank you for that. I know, Russ, in some of the conversations we've had before, we learned that you, in fact, have been going through a migration of your data estate from on-prem to the cloud over the last several years. In fact, in our conversations, you're about 60 to 70% of the way through that process. I thought the first topic we might talk about is a little bit about that process overall. We've recently done some research in this area and very interested in the sort of the challenges that people face as they go through that multi-month to multi-year process. So I wonder if you could talk for just a minute about kind of how you prioritized the things that you transitioned. You know, what were the easy things that you started with first, if that in fact was your approach, and then how did you decide how things should follow after that?
Sure. I'm happy to say that I've personally overseen, 3 different cloud migrations, and I can tell you at every different company, it's a little bit different. The challenges that you encounter are not identical from organization to organization based on how it's broke up, how it's structured, what the culture is like, and what the expectations for migrating to the cloud look like. But for us here, our goal was to create universal trust in the data where it may not have existed before. And for us, we ended up picking some of the areas of highest concern first, and focusing on those as sort of the big rock items that we would prioritize. So things that were perceived to be inaccurate or old or uncared for, data sources, data feeds, data topics in general were the ones that we ended up tackling first. And primarily, the key drivers to our business. So we picked off as a payer, we have certain things from, claims, pharmacy, eligibility that we're responsible for in all markets. And, so those quickly rose to the top of things that we needed to prioritize first, and then start tackling things that had their own custom-built data marts, kind of purpose-built solutions that helped individual areas of the company do their jobs effectively.
That's interesting because it sounds as though you started with things that might not necessarily have been the easiest to do. Often we hear about phases of work that includes sort of start with a lift and shift approach. And typically that's done with the things that are in fact simplest, and the more complicated things are left to that kind of last mile, which are the most difficult to get to. How do you resonate with that, given it sounds like when you talked about some of the things that you first moved were the things that were uncared for and needed the most attention? Those sound like the tough ones.
You're right, they were. And honestly, that was how we decided that we would best demonstrate value. It wasn't picking the easiest things and doing it. It was picking the hardest things and showing that it could be done in a better way and be able to provide more analytical opportunities on data sources and data areas that didn't have that care or management or governance previously. So that was where we were demonstrating our value back to the business and saying, we understand, we've heard you. These are the points that are the pain points in the organization, and we're gonna pick those off first and come back and find out what's next after that. So we ended up developing some partnerships with various units within the business to help us get there, because in a lot of cases it wasn't necessarily a clear lift and shift. Something that I know we've talked about is business priorities have changed, leadership has changed, even philosophy toward how we were going to manage things like self-service reporting or things like that have changed. And a lot of times we found that there just weren't necessarily a knowledgeable SME as to what had been built before. So rather than having a very clear set of requirements that we were just going to replicate, it was, hey, let's figure this out together. What does the right solution look like? And build out our end state from there, which is really rewarding in a lot of ways because you get automatic adoption from people that are now bought into the process because they're the ones helping design the solutions with you.
Right. So stakeholder management was a critically important part. Did you work with the stakeholders to help do that prioritization in the beginning in terms of what should move and when?
Absolutely. I would say, communication and partnership and alignment is critical to our success and often overlooked in the sort of data and analytics space. You'll see a lot of it when it comes to dashboarding or reporting that somebody says, hey, I want to work with the business owner and I want to find out, is this graph going to be a bar graph or is this going to turn yellow at some certain threshold? But you don't see it as much historically on the data engineering side with, really engaging and developing sort of data stewards, knowledgeable folks on the business and data owners who are willing to make decisions as to what the right answers are when there's not a very clear path or direction.
Yeah, that's interesting. The research we've done recently indicated that some of the biggest challenges in migrations were properly managing governance right from the start, and not doing sort of a big bang governance switch, but doing it in a very thoughtful manner. Tell us a little bit about how governance might have been done, beforehand and how you might have changed it as you migrated to the cloud.
It's interesting. We had an opportunity to sort of reboot governance. It had not existed a couple different iterations previously, and we were looking at it as a chance to ensure that we had governed data from the start. That was one of our guiding principles, was to, kind of kick that off and really create that partnership along the way so that we made sure that the solutions didn't go down the same path, that we don't trust the data, we only want to go to the original source. As we look at curating data and aggregating data sets from disparate sources, we wanted that buy-in right from the beginning, and we're able to help get that to fruition. Everybody kind of knows that you need governance, but it's not the sexiest work. It's down in the details. It's, debating over what specific metric calculations you're going to use or what, which industry standard you're going to adopt, and whether you need to spin out new metrics to support financial reporting versus operational reporting versus analytical reporting. And that can sometimes lead to a lot of sort of territory or kind of hurt feelings. But if you approach it in a very analytical sort of way, then everybody was able to come to terms with, we understand that we need two different definitions for something, because we're using it in two different ways. And as long as you have a catalog that supports that in a way to clearly specify which one you're using and why, then we were able to make a lot of progress with governing the terms and metrics that our company uses.
Yeah, and I think your point earlier about how you moved the biggest pain points first for your stakeholders and promised them more beneficial outcomes in the cloud. That's a good opportunity to reset governance, right? It's sort of a carrot and a stick approach. We're going to give you the carrot, this thing that you hope is going to work better in the cloud, but there are a few attachments to that. One is we have to rework governance and make sure that it continues to function better in the cloud than it did on-prem, right? So it's a nice sort of combination of things to take to your stakeholders.
Anything other than that, I think you're just sort of off innovating in a corner and hope somebody adopts it. So it's
right.
Really a matter of making sure that you've got buy-in from all levels, from the executive leadership down to the day-to-day users of it that are going to be using the platform.
Right, absolutely. Russ, earlier you mentioned self-service, right? Which is, actually a very powerful outcome in data and analytics today, right? It can really transform cycle time, as well as the insights that you gain from your analytics. What was the impetus for your migration? Was it originally expected cost savings? Was it in fact to enable self-service as a strategy generally? What drove you to the migration to begin with?
For us, it was a trusted data source, a reliable data source. We had a couple sort of major challenges. One of which was the belief that the data was being properly curated, aggregated, managed, the availability of the platform. We had so much data in our on-premise ecosystem that processing times had ground to a halt, and getting accurate and timely data was something that was a solution that we were going to solve in the cloud, and not necessarily by throwing more on-premise horsepower at it, or more servers, or distributing it. Enabling self-service reporting, I don't know that it was necessarily one of our top three primary drivers, but it's definitely a capability within the company that we're able to promote as something that previously had to go through IT, or previously had to go through some sort of elaborate process to find answers for.
Right. Yeah. And so, we often look at sort of the degree of centralization or decentralization in analytics, and obviously that cloud migration sets up a couple of options for you. In fact, all of the options still remain to some degree in cloud, but how would you describe what you guys transitioned through? Did you go from something that was more centralized to now you've enabled some decentralization?
There's a lot of different patterns out there, and you'll hear things like data meshes, or data fabrics, or data lake houses. And, I think at the end of the day, it comes out to what's going to work for your organization, and what's going to work for your stakeholders. For us, it was a combination of modeled, aggregated, curated data at a consumption layer that was easily searchable and easily discoverable, plus the availability of a significant amount of reference data that could be merged in, but didn't necessarily require the same level of curation to get to that final model. So kind of a hybrid approach. The way we got there was there was a historic older way of looking at ETL as everything had to go through the same pipeline, and whether it made sense or not, it went through that pipeline. And once we were able to sort of break that cultural mindset that this was the only way it could be done, and you didn't necessarily need everything to go through 15 different steps, that you were able to make things available faster and more in a kind of immediately available way. And
Right.
People really appreciated that.
Well, thank you, Russ Scoville. We really appreciate your time today. Thanks for joining me. And everyone else, please visit cdomagazine.tech for additional interviews.